I had a couple of questions, but I don't know if anybody else has the questions they'd like to ask first. So maybe you guys could share the microphone. I had a question for Rafe.
Well, yeah, Rafe, you talked about pilot programs, and I wonder if you could mention a couple of pilot programs. Maybe I know I happen to remember the name Civic Lab, but I wonder if you could maybe mention a couple of them and how they've helped accelerate this market, and if any sharing has gone on in that process that fits into the models of what you described as how the carbon benefit, even though it isn't a dollar value in somebody's pocket, turns into a lower cost project overall.
Right. So, so the program that I ran at SACOG was called Civic Lab. It was this idea of launching pilots to test new innovative solutions, mobility solutions, and just to see, one, if they would work, two, what the cost was, and three, how could you scale them. So I mentioned a couple. One was running an electric autonomous shuttle on Sacramento State. It was really looking at how do you move students to and from light rail. We ran into some issues early on with it in terms of legislation where we couldn't actually run on a public road, so it's just running around the campus to see if they can move students. But we partnered with a private sector vendor that said we'll give you an incredibly low rate. We needed to install some chargers, but it was a great way and very low cost way for Sacramento State to test it out to see what would the adoption from the students be. Could this actually be used on the campus? And then it was also a great way for the provider, the service provider, to see, okay, does my technology work? How does it deploy? What is the market perception of this? I think the whole thing was 17 to 20 grand. So it was a super easy way to just test something out. We were working with Franklin Boulevard Business District, RT. SMUD was involved in another one that we took RT's Smart Ride, which is a great microtransit, so it's much smaller buses, so it gets to one of those things about reducing the size of your vehicles, running smaller buses in a particular area as a first mile, last mile, so connecting the residents on Franklin Boulevard to light rail stops so they can go a lot further. And we received some money from Electrify America to actually electrify those buses. So it was, again, partnering and finding ways to bring dollars to the table. SACOG did put some money in on that, and it's been a great pilot in terms of trying to get people and move them around the region. We're working in rural communities. There's one that's, again, it's a microtransit, trying to move people from farm labor to jobs, but also to services like medical appointments in schools, and using, again, smaller buses, traveling with, instead of a 40-foot bus with 5 people in it, let's just use a passenger van that we can move people around. We're looking at how we can electrify those. So we worked, again, with a private sector vendor to come in to pilot this to see does it actually pencil out from the transit provider's perspective, but also the private sector. So it took some upfront public subsidy, but if it actually works and it pencils out, then you look at how do you move to scale. So it's the idea behind pilot is, again, that low cost entry to test something out. I think is a great way to find those partnerships that can actually, public-private partnerships that can actually work. So they can look at, okay, how do you move to scale? But if you're a public sector, you can see, okay, does this actually work for me? Procurement's going to be a little bit easier, and then we can move to full scale. I don't know if that answers your question.
I had another question for Joe.
Well, I have a very, it's probably narrow, but that's me. On the EER ratings of electric vehicles, I noticed there was dots all across the bottom line. What changes that efficiency?
So basically that was, we had a number of different electric vehicle types. We had, light duty passenger cars, we had electric buses, we had heavy duty electric vehicles, we had electric cargo handling equipment, electric ships at berth, electric refrigeration. So each one of those had a different dot, which again represents how much diesel or gasoline is displaced in each of those applications.
Okay, so it wasn't battery technology.
Yeah, it's basically more the efficiency of the powertrain and the fuel in that application.
I had another one for Rafe, actually. And I know this is horribly politically incorrect.
No.
But at one point, the concept of solar panels shading a parking lot, battery storage, electric vehicle charging, and whatnot, and that could conceivably be a climate action plan measure to reduce GHG in a community. John talked about a lot of drop-in renewable fuels, which actually have these fairly large credit values coming back to the fleet manager, which might in fact cost very little. So you have a balance, it looks like, where you could have the exact same amount of greenhouse gas emissions, the value in quantity and for two different measures that a local agency could consider. One of which has this great community value, the other one of which is enormously less expensive to implement. I don't know whether I'm asking you a question or just making that statement, but sort of where, you know, what would SACOG's position have been on that if you were still there? What would, you know, and I was still at the Air District. What would you say to me?
Well, so I think about those three buckets again. You know, reducing trips, reducing miles, and reducing fuel. And so I think that you can look at, and in some ways I see fuel as being the low-hanging fruit. So if you can, change the fuel that's being used, that's one thing you could do, and whatever measures you can have in place to get there. And then the next and the harder things are thinking about how do you reduce trips and how do you reduce miles. And that can be, some of those examples that I gave of these other types of programs that you could implement. So what would SACOG's perspective be? It would be, how are we reducing congestion on the road? So probably trying to reduce the number of trips, reducing fleet size, reducing the size of the vehicles. All of these things are going to have a benefit for both. It's going to reduce the amount of GHG that you're putting out, and it's going to make the overall transportation system more effective, which for everyone reduces GHG, right? If you don't have a lot of congestion from a lot of really big trucks on the road, then maybe there's a savings that way. It's a tough one to answer. I think of like Amazon. Amazon has really changed the way we think about logistics and fleet. Instead of running gigantic trucks all over, they've put small little vehicles on the road. Is that more efficient and more effective? Is that creating more VMT? Hard to say. Same with TNCs, Uber, Lyft. There's been a lot of analysis that's saying that they're actually increasing VMT and increasing GHG. Is that true? Maybe I'm not driving my personal car as much, but it might take them more miles to come and pick me up and drive me to my destination. So I think that it's some of these things are more on the forefront of what we're looking at. And I think ultimately they're going to get there. And so I think it takes those partnerships. So which one's better? It's hard to say. If they're removing the same amount of GHG, then maybe it doesn't matter. But if there is a potential to have an impact beyond what they're doing in just their operations and can help, reduce congestion overall and make the entire system more effective and efficient, I think that's what we'd be looking at. So, and I think that's where the public-private partnerships come in. I'm a private sector guy too. I don't necessarily think of the whole, common good, where I think that's where the public comes in. So I think that's where those partnerships are even more important. Things like climate action plans and EIRs that can help implement those. I don't know if that addresses it or maybe I skirted around.
Question for you, John. In the LCFS pricing and the credits, is there any benefits for locally produced renewable electricity versus renewable electricity imported from outside of California, or assuming that the source is exactly the same?
Yeah, so I actually, there are benefits for California sourced renewable electricity. There's the opportunity for maybe out of state renewable, but actually the rules are more to benefit in-state renewables. So it's really in-state renewables.
So on that, John, do you know how it ties in with the REC? Because you pretty much have to relinquish the REC in order to claim the LCFS credits, correct?
Yes, and the way they have the rules written right now, it's you need to be California cited RECs or
Oh, you have to?
well, there are some ways to get around that, but just it's more challenging and difficult. But really, they're encouraging in-state renewable production.
This one's for you. So you mentioned receiving credits for charging stations that are powered by solar. Would you be able to go more into that and see? I guess we're just wondering what circumstances that would work for.
Well, I guess within the old regulation, you had to have a solar panel on site with the EV charger, for instance. And actually, we did a project with the client that they had 2 wind turbines on site at the same place. They're charging EVs. We had to go through what the CARB calls a pathway certification. We had to basically, prove that. In the new regulation, like Marco said, there is the ability to indirectly match RECs or renewable energy certificates. There are still some very specific requirements and some tricks and nuances on that, but it is a lot more possible to do that now. Does that kind of answer your question?
So does it have to be on site or?
No, it does not have to be on site. I mean, there are ways you can do it if it's not on site.
I have another one for Rafe, actually. So Rafe, if John described a lot of systems that, although they're complex, they're regulations with rules and charts, and they're decipherable if you have enough skill to be able to work your way through the process. And you described a set of negotiations and interactions and relationships, really almost, that don't have quite the same level of metrics, except for EIRs, where somebody has to literally measure emissions. But then the mitigation part of it is, how do I do that? Or the climate action plan, where you've got to do it, but what am I going to do? If somebody was saying, I need to figure out how to get this thing done, where would they go? I mean, what would they do? What would they say? I mean, I need to figure out how to solve this problem. If I'm a fleet operator and I need to know how to do credits, I know I can go talk to John. If somebody says, I got a problem, I'm a developer and I know I've got a big problem because my development's going to be nothing but 2 homes per acre, everybody's got a horse and cul-de-sac, nothing that's any even remotely good for transportation purposes. What do they do? Where do they go to? Where do they go to get somebody to help them figure this stuff out?
Yeah, it's all got to start with whoever the regulatory agency is that's setting it up. So whether it's something in an EIR because you're developing something, or it's a climate action plan and you're just trying to find that or implement that mitigation, you've got to start with whoever that agency is. I think that you build on existing relationships that you already have. I think that and that's private, public-private, public-public. You build on those existing relationships, and then I think it's a little bit of a community building. You have to look at what is the community impact that you're having, and maybe start with those stakeholders. And it makes it a little bit more onerous to get to something. But I think if you start where the impacts are going to occur with the stakeholders, that you're going to daylight what some of those potential solutions could be, and who are the partners that you need to bring to the table, and those relationships you need to build to start to find those mitigation opportunities, or those opportunities to actually implement these things. I think working with somebody like Franklin Boulevard is a great example. That here they are, not really public-private. They're kind of somewhere in between, but they've gone out and they've found those opportunities and those partnerships with SMUD and the Air District and others to build a case, and they recognized the impact, and they recognized what was, you know, happening within their community, and they knew the stakeholders, and they were able to build upon their existing relationships and build programs out of that. And so I think it takes some legwork, but you know, you identify the stakeholders in your community where the impact's going to happen, and it's going to open up the doors on how to implement.
Well, I'm really asking the question. You threw a slide up there that had a couple red circles on it, and you were saying to us, okay, you know, what could you do? Well, who's out there that thinks about parking lots and TNCs and commuting strategies for I mean, that's not necessarily going to surface just if you talk to stakeholders. They wouldn't know necessarily to think about that kind of stuff.
They're going to highlight what the issue and the challenge is. So, you know, you're putting in a parking lot and you talk to the school up the street, and they're going to say, yeah, well, I'm having this issue with, you know, I don't know where to park my buses at the end of the day. I don't know if this is a real thing or not, but, you know, you find out what their issue and their challenges are, and then that opens the door to, okay, well, you know, here's what the real challenge, or here's what the real issue is. And then you start to build on those existing relationships you have. You contact the air district and you say, okay, here's the problem that we have. Or you contact the city who's saying, we've got this community-based climate action plan. How can we actually implement that? You call John and you say, okay, where are the credits that we can start to bring it in? So there's probably got to be an aggregator out there. Maybe that's SACOG, maybe that's a city, maybe that's the air district. Who knows? But you once you know what the issue and the challenge is, I think the solution providers become more apparent.